What happens when an algorithm is the one making a life or death call? Today, we're diving into a really powerful analysis that's right at this wild intersection of AI, law, and, well, ethics. We're going to break down how these new AI targeting systems are really pushing the boundaries and maybe even breaking the established rules of war.
Yeah, that's really the core question of this whole explainer. And look, this isn't some far-off sci-fi movie plot. The analysis we're digging into looks at AI systems that are being used right now, today. So we're forced to deal with this question not in the future, but right now.
Okay, so before we can even get into the legal and ethical debates, we've got to understand the tech itself. What are these AI systems, exactly? What were they actually designed to do?
So the analysis really zooms in on two main systems. They're separate, but they work together. First, you've got Lavender. You can think of this one as the WHO system. It's basically a massive AI database that churns through all sorts of data to slap a risk score on people, flagging them as suspected operatives. Then you have Where's Daddy? That's the when and where part of the equation. It's a tracking system that pings an operator when a target's cell phone shows up at their home. So see how they connect? One system says, this is the person, and the other one says, and now's the time.
And this is a really, really important point in the analysis. The authors argue this wasn't about AI just helping a human make a better decision. Nope, the goal was to straight up replace human decision-making at its core. The power, as they put it, was fundamentally handed over from the person to the machine.
Okay, so we've got a handle on the technology. Now for the big question. Is any of this legal? The authors take these systems and pretty much put them on trial against the established rulebook for war. They're asking, can this brand new tech even begin to fit inside these decades-old rules?
And that rulebook has a name, International Humanitarian Law, or IHL for short. Its whole reason for existing is to put limits on war. To protect civilians and try to hang on to some baseline of humanity, even when things are at their worst. This is the framework for everything we're about to talk about.
Now, IHL is huge, but this analysis really focuses on three absolute core principles that have to govern any and every attack. They are distinction, proportionality, and precautions. Let's take them one by one and see how these AI systems reportedly measure up.
All right, first up, distinction. This is pretty much the most fundamental rule of war. You have to be able to tell the difference between fighters and civilians, period. Attacks are only supposed to be aimed at military targets. Sounds simple, right? But in the real world, it's insanely complicated. And that gets even messier when you throw an algorithm into the mix.
And this is where things get really sticky. Under IHL, if there's any doubt at all, a person is presumed to be a civilian. It's like innocent until proven guilty, but for non-combatants. But according to the sources in this article, that whole idea got flipped on its head. The Lavender algorithm would flag someone, and then an operator would apparently just do a quick check to see if the person was male. If they were, boom, they were often just treated as a combatant. The authors argue that's a 180-degree reversal of a core legal standard.
Okay, next principle, proportionality. This one says you can't launch an attack if the harm to civilians is going to be excessive compared to the military advantage you'd gain. It's meant to be a really strict, careful balancing act.
And wow, this is where the concern laid out by the authors becomes crystal clear. The reporting they're analyzing claims that there were pre-approved quotas for collateral damage. Think about that. For a lower-level target, they were reportedly allowed to kill 15 to 20 civilians. But for a senior target, that number could shoot up to over 100. This whole concept of pre-authorizing a specific number of civilian deaths, well, that's right at the center of the whole legal argument here.
This quote, which comes from one of the sources cited in the article, just lays it out in the plainest terms imaginable. I mean, when people are being told that they are allowed to kill many civilians along with a target, well, the authors argue that the legal principle of proportionality has, at that point, essentially been thrown out the window.
All right, on to the third and final legal test, precautions. This is the rule that says you have to take every feasible step to avoid or at least minimize harm to civilians. Things like double-checking a target, giving warnings if possible, or using a more precise weapon. And the analysis points to a whole list of what they say are failures of precaution. Things like using unguided or dumb bombs on people's homes, not giving any warnings to the people inside. And this one is critical. There was often a time lag between when the AI sent the alert and when the strike actually happened. That apparently meant that sometimes families were hid after the intended target had already left the building. So the conclusion here is pretty stark. Without meaningful human verification, that duty of precaution just wasn't being met.
So the legal analysis we've just walked through is pretty damning. But the authors don't stop there. They push it a step further. They argue this isn't just about what's legal, it's about what's right. And that's where we shift from the laws of war to the ethics of war.
And the paper makes this really interesting distinction, pulling from the philosopher Immanuel Kant. The laws of war, those are juridical. They're external rules you have to follow. But the ethics of war, that's about morality, the internal why behind an action, the motive. The point is, you could follow a law perfectly, but still be doing something deeply unethical.
This whole ethical framework has a name, jus in bello. It basically means justice in war. So it's not about why a war began, but about how it's being fought. And you'll see some familiar ideas here, like proportionality and the need to differentiate who you're targeting. And this quote from the philosopher John Rawls really nails the core ethical argument. The idea is that if the way you fight a war creates a deep-seated contempt for human life, you're actually destroying the possibility of achieving a just peace in the end. Your methods can completely undermine your goals. How you fight matters just as much as why.
And then the analysis hits you with this just staggering number. The Lavender system is suspected to have put as many as 37,000 people on its target list. And this is where the authors pose a massive ethical question. Can an algorithm really, truly differentiate between combatants and civilians when it's cranking out potential kill lists at that kind of industrial scale?
So, when you put all of this together, it builds to a really stark warning about where we're headed. The authors are saying, hey, don't look at this as just a one-off thing. They see it as a terrifying sneak peek into a totally unregulated new age of warfare. I mean, look, the tactics of war are always changing. We've seen it go from the lightning speed of blitzkrieg in World War II to the surgical accuracy of precision-guided missiles. But the argument in this source is that AI-driven targeting isn't just another step. It's a fundamental shift. It's a massive leap in speed and automation that our laws and our ethics just haven't caught up with yet.
So let's just quickly recap the core findings here. We're talking about automated kill lists with barely any human oversight. We're talking about pre-approved quotas for civilian casualties, actions that seem to fly in the face of both international law and the ethics of war. And maybe the most chilling fact of all, hanging over everything, is that right now there is no international treaty specifically designed to regulate this kind of military AI.
And all of that brings us to the final, really haunting question that the authors leave us to wrestle with. When an algorithm helps make a decision to kill someone, who's actually responsible? Is it the coder who wrote the software? The analyst who just spent 20 seconds looking at the output? The commander who approved the whole system? In this new age of truly dehumanized decisions, figuring out who's accountable, well, it's never been more urgent.